In the summer of 1942, a young Soviet woman stood before a crowd of American workers in Chicago's Grant Park. She wore a military uniform with medals pinned to her chest and carried the quiet confidence of someone who had stared death in the face hundreds of times. She was just 25 years old, and she had killed 309 enemy soldiers. The crowd looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and disbelief. Here was a woman, barely older than a college student, who had spent months lying motionless in the rubble of besieged Soviet cities, picking off Nazi soldiers one by one through her rifle scope. She looked out at those American men, many of whom had never seen combat and never would, and delivered words that cut straight to the bone. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" A moment of stunned silence. Then the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. This was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the deadliest female sniper in recorded history. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Belova was born on July 12, 1916, in a small town called Bila Tserkva, located in what is now modern-day Ukraine. By her own description, she was a tomboy from the very beginning, competitive, athletic, stubborn, and utterly unwilling to be outdone by anyone, especially boys. That competitive fire would shape the rest of her extraordinary life. When her family moved to the city of Kiev around 1930, 14-year-old Lyudmila discovered something that would change everything. A neighbor boy was bragging about his skills at a local shooting club, boasting about his marksmanship scores as if shooting was something girls could never possibly master. That was exactly the wrong thing to say to young Lyudmila Belova. She decided right then to prove him completely wrong. "I set out to show that a girl could do as well," she later explained with characteristic directness. "So I practiced a lot." She joined an OSO Aviakim shooting club. These were paramilitary organizations across the Soviet Union that trained young people in various military skills, including precision marksmanship. She took to it immediately, displaying natural talent combined with fierce determination that impressed even her most skeptical instructors. While working at the Kiev arsenal factory during the day and attending night school in the evenings, she spent every spare moment at the shooting range perfecting her technique. Before long, she had earned the prestigious Voroshilov sharpshooter badge, concrete proof that she could outshoot most men twice her age. By 1937, she had enrolled at Kiev University to study history, while also completing 6 months of formal Red Army sniper training on the side. By June of 1941, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was in her 4th year at university, completing diploma research in the southern port city of Odessa on the Black Sea coast. She was 24 years old, a single mother raising a young son named Rostislav from a brief teenage marriage that had dissolved years earlier. She was planning a quiet career as an academic historian, spending her days in archives and libraries. Then everything changed overnight. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union with the largest military force ever assembled in human history, nearly 4 million soldiers pouring across the border in 3 massive army groups, launching a campaign of conquest and annihilation. The peaceful future Pavlichenko had imagined vanished in an instant. She went straight to the military recruiting office in Odessa, determined to defend her homeland. The registrar took one look at her, a young woman with delicate features, and tried to push her toward the nursing corps. Women belonged in support roles behind lines, not carrying rifles on the front. That was the conventional thinking, even in those desperate early days of the German invasion. She flatly refused. She produced her marksmanship certificates, her Voroshilov badge, her documentation proving 6 months of completed sniper training. The officials remained skeptical. A woman as a combat sniper still seemed absurd to them. So they decided to give her a practical test, right there on the spot, something that would settle the question once and for all. They handed her a rifle and pointed toward a nearby hill where 2 Romanian soldiers, military allies of the Germans, were working in the open. "Shoot them," they told her. "Prove yourself." Without hesitation, she raised the rifle, sighted carefully, and fired twice. Both soldiers fell dead. "When I picked off the 2," she later recalled, "I was accepted." But she never counted those kills as official. "They were test shots," she said matter-of-factly. She was assigned to the 25th Chapiev Rifle Division, a unit that would see some of the heaviest fighting of the entire Eastern Front campaign. The chaos of the early invasion meant severe equipment shortages across the front. Initially, Pavlichenko didn't even have a proper weapon. She dug defensive trenches armed with nothing but a single hand grenade. That desperate situation changed in late July when a wounded comrade handed her his Mosin Nagant rifle before being evacuated to the rear. This weapon would become an extension of her body over the coming months of brutal combat. The Mosin Nagant was a bolt-action rifle, standard issue for Soviet infantry, chambered in 7.62 mm, with a 5-round internal magazine. The rifle weighed approximately 4 kilograms with its scope attached. Fitted with a PE telescopic sight offering just under 4 power magnification, it was accurate and deadly at ranges exceeding 800 meters in trained hands. In Pavlichenko's hands, it became a precision instrument capable of ending lives at distances where victims never heard the shot that killed them. Her first officially recorded kills came on August 8, 1941, near the village of Belyaivka during the defense of Odessa. She spotted 2 Nazi officers approximately 400 meters away, moving carelessly across open ground in what they assumed was safety. 2 carefully aimed shots. 2 kills. Her war had truly begun. What happened over the next 3 weeks defied all expectations and established her growing reputation among Soviet forces. By August 29th, just 21 days after those first kills, Lyudmila Pavlichenko had reached 100 confirmed enemy kills. 100 lives ended through her rifle scope in less than a month of combat. She was immediately promoted to senior sergeant, and word of her deadly accuracy began spreading through Soviet military ranks and eventually to the propaganda offices in Moscow, seeking heroes for public morale. The siege of Odessa lasted 73 brutal days as Soviet forces, outnumbered and outgunned, desperately defended their vital port city against relentless Axis assault. Romanian and German forces surrounded Odessa on 3 sides, while Soviet ships evacuated civilians and brought in desperately needed supplies across the Black Sea. During this siege, Pavlichenko accumulated 187 confirmed kills, roughly 2.5 every single day, sustained over more than 2 months of continuous combat. Soviet snipers operated with what they called Kuma Lemon, free rein to move about the battlefield. They typically left camp before dawn, found concealed positions with good sightlines, and returned only after darkness fell. This meant hours upon hours of lying perfectly still in cramped hiding spots, watching, rating, controlling every breath, fighting the overwhelming urge to move even when muscles screamed for relief and insects crawled across exposed skin. Patience was everything in this deadly game. During the desperate Odessa campaign, Pavlichenko also fell in love. His name was Alexei Kitsenko. Some sources give his first name as Leonid, and he was a fellow sniper in her unit. They fought side by side, watching each other's backs. Somewhere amid the chaos, they married. But Odessa could not hold forever against overwhelming enemy numbers. On October 15, 1941, the city finally fell to Axis forces. Pavlichenko's unit was among those evacuated by ship across the Black Sea to a new defensive position, one that would prove even more brutal than anything she had experienced so far. They were heading to Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, and what awaited them there would test the absolute limits of human endurance. The siege of Sevastopol began in late October 1941, and would not end until early July 1942, 8 months of unrelenting hell that Pavlichenko herself later described as the most intense fighting she ever experienced in Sevastopol, her entire military career. Soviet defenders were outnumbered approximately 10-1 against German forces determined to capture this strategically vital naval base at any cost. The scale of destruction inflicted on Sevastopol was almost beyond human comprehension. In June 1942 alone, the siege's final and most brutal month, the Luftwaffe flew over 23,000 individual sorties against the city, dropping more than 20,000 tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs. German artillery batteries added another 46,000 tons of shells, including massive projectiles from the legendary 800mm Dora railway gun, the largest artillery piece ever used in combat. By the time Sevastopol finally fell, only 11 undamaged buildings remained standing in the entire city. Everything else had been reduced to smoking rubble and shattered concrete. The air shook with incessant cannonading, exploding shells and bombs. Pavlichenko later testified to American audiences. "We hadn't enough shells or food, but we hung on. The city had ceased to be. There was nothing save a heap of ruins." In this apocalyptic nightmare landscape of constant bombardment and death, Pavlichenko continued her deadly work with grim determination. But she did more than just kill. She also trained the next generation of snipers who would carry on after her. Over the course of the siege, she personally instructed approximately 80 new snipers in her techniques, her patience, her methods of concealment and deception. Their combined kills would eventually exceed 2,000 enemy soldiers, multiplying her impact far beyond her own rifle. In May 1942, the Southern Army Council formally cited her achievements with an official recognition, documenting 257 confirmed kills. She was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. By the time Sevastopol finally fell to German assault 2 months later, she had added 52 more kills, bringing her confirmed count to 309. But those cold numbers cannot capture the devastating personal cost she paid during those months in Sevastopol. In March of 1942, Alexei Kitsenko was mortally wounded by an enemy mortar shell during combat operations. Some accounts claim he threw himself over Pavlichenko to protect her from the blast, shielding her body with his own. Whether that specific detail is true or not, he lingered for several agonizing days in a field hospital before finally dying from his wounds. The man she loved, her fellow sniper, her husband, gone forever. There was no time for proper mourning. The shells kept falling without pause. The enemy kept coming in endless waves. And she kept shooting, channeling her grief into cold, methodical precision behind her rifle scope. Some part of her died in that hospital room, but the rest of her kept fighting because there was no other choice. Among Pavlichenko's most impressive and terrifying achievements was her counter-sniper record. Out of her 309 total confirmed kills, 36 were enemy snipers. These weren't ordinary soldiers caught in the open. These were highly trained German marksmen, experts at concealment and camouflage, patient hunters who had themselves claimed many victims before encountering her. The National World War II Museum confirms she won every single sniper duel she ever fought. Every single one. Counter-sniper warfare is perhaps the most psychologically demanding form of combat imaginable. 2 highly trained killers, each hunting the other across a shattered landscape, each knowing with absolute certainty that the slightest mistake, a momentary glint of light reflecting off a rifle scope, a single unnecessary movement, even breathing too heavily, means instant death. Her most famous documented duel lasted an incredible 3 days. 3 full days of lying absolutely motionless in a concealed position, watching and waiting, matching wits and patience with an enemy sniper she could not see, but knew was out there somewhere, hunting her just as intently. German snipers were masters of deception and psychological warfare, employing every trick in the book to force their opponents into fatal mistakes. They would raise tin helmets barely visible above cover, hoping to draw fire and pinpoint her location. They sent stray cats wandering through the rubble as distractions, watching carefully to see if any movement betrayed a hidden position. They dangled full uniform dummies on sticks, hoping she would waste a precious shot and reveal herself to their waiting crosshairs. But Pavlichenko refused to take any bait. Her patience was infinite. "That was one of the tensest experiences of my entire life," she recalled years later. "I had to maintain my position for 15 to 20 hours at a stretch without moving. No shifting position to relieve cramped muscles. No sound beyond controlled breathing. Just watching through her scope hour after hour, breathing slowly and deliberately, controlling every muscle fiber while her opponent did exactly the same thing somewhere in the ruins nearby. Finally, he made one move too many," she said simply. One account specifies that this particular duel occurred on a bombed-out bridge and ended when she spotted the fatal flash of sunlight reflecting off her opponent's field glasses as he tried to locate her position. One precisely aimed shot. The 3-day duel was over in an instant. Patience and discipline had triumphed once again. Her tactical methods were ruthlessly effective and coldly systematic. She was known for lying completely motionless for up to 18 consecutive hours, consuming only dry bread and small amounts of water, while remaining perfectly concealed in her firing position. She never fired more than one shot from any location. After each kill, she immediately relocated to a different position, no matter how safe the original spot might seem. She never returned to the same hiding place twice, knowing that patterns get snipers killed. She used mannequins from destroyed clothing stores as realistic decoys, positioning them carefully to draw enemy fire and force opposing snipers to reveal their locations. She preferred hunting during thunderstorms or heavy artillery barrages, when the distinctive crack of her rifle would be completely masked by the ambient chaos of explosions. Every advantage, no matter how small, could mean the difference between killing and being killed. Pavlichenko suffered 4 separate combat wounds during her service at Odessa and Sevastopol, 2 of them described in official records as serious injuries requiring extended recovery. She also experienced shell shock from the constant bombardment, what we would today recognize as blast-induced traumatic brain injury, that temporarily affected her hearing. A visible scar remained permanently over the bridge of her nose from shrapnel, marking her face for life. Her final and most serious wound came in June 1942, during the chaotic evacuation of Sevastopol, as German forces overwhelmed the last Soviet offensive lines. Mortar shrapnel struck her directly in the face, leaving wounds that required extensive medical treatment. The Soviet High Command ordered her evacuated from Crimea by submarine to the mainland port of Novorossiysk. After approximately 1 month of hospitalization, military authorities made a firm decision about her future. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was simply too valuable, both as a skilled trainer of new snipers and as a propaganda symbol for Soviet morale, to risk losing in further frontline combat. She would never return to active combat duty, despite her own expressed wishes to keep fighting. Instead, she was assigned to train new snipers behind the lines, passing on the deadly skills that had made her so effective. And then, in September 1942, she was selected for a mission of an entirely different kind, one that would take her halfway around the world. The Soviet delegation arrived in Washington, D.C. on August 27, 1942, officially to attend something called the International Student Assembly. But the true strategic purpose was building American public support for opening a second front in Western Europe. This was a desperate moment for the Soviet Union. The Battle of Stalingrad was raging, and German forces had pushed deep into Soviet territory. Stalin was demanding that the Western Allies launch an invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe to take pressure off the Eastern Front. Pavlichenko was accompanied by fellow sniper Vladimir Pavlichenko, and Moscow official Nikolai Krasavchenko, but she was clearly the star attraction, a young woman with hundreds of confirmed kills, battle scars, and a story that would capture American imagination. She became the first Soviet citizen ever received at the White House by a sitting American president. Franklin Roosevelt himself asked her detailed questions about her combat experience and the decorations she wore on her uniform. When conversation turned to the Second Front, Roosevelt blamed British hesitancy, while personally assuring her that the American people fully supported their Russian allies in the struggle against fascism. But if President Roosevelt was gracious in welcoming, the American press corps proved to be something else entirely. The New York Times casually dubbed her the girl sniper, as if she was some kind of amusing novelty act rather than a decorated combat veteran. Reporters noted condescendingly that she wore no lip rouge or makeup of any kind, and wrote that her military uniform made her look fat. Questions focused obsessively on cosmetics, the color of her underwear, whether Soviet women were allowed to use nail polish, and how she styled her hair under combat conditions. Here was a battle-hardened soldier who had killed 309 enemies and survived 2 brutal sieges, and American journalists wanted to know about her beauty routine. One reporter actually criticized the length of her regulation military skirt. In America, he informed her condescendingly, women wear shorter skirts. Co-responses to this absurd line of questioning were characteristically direct and cutting. On the makeup question, there is no rule against it, but who has time to think of her shiny nose when a battle is going on? On the underwear questions, in Russia you would get a slap in the face for asking a question like that. To Time magazine, she expressed her amazement at American women journalists. Don't they know there is a war? By the time the delegation's tour reached Chicago, Pavlichenko had found her authentic public voice and learned how to command American audiences. Standing before that crowd in Grant Park, trade unionists and factory workers looking at her quite affably, she delivered the words that would define her entire American visit, and echo through decades of history. Those words about Americans hiding behind her back cut through the comfortable distance that many felt from the war raging across Europe. Eleanor Roosevelt's initial reaction to meeting Pavlichenko was noticeably awkward and uncomfortable. The First Lady remarked publicly that it would be hard for American women to understand someone who had shot so effectively to kill other human beings. Pavlichenko, already prejudiced against what she assumed was merely a wealthy aristocrat who had never known hardship, responded with icy coldness. An accurate bullet is no more than a response to a vicious enemy. But something genuinely remarkable happened over the following weeks of the tour. Eleanor apologized sincerely for her thoughtless initial comment and personally invited Pavlichenko to stay at Hyde Park, the Roosevelt family's private estate in New York. In an unexpectedly intimate moment, Eleanor altered her own pajamas by hand, so her Soviet guest would have something comfortable to sleep in. When she saw the terrible shrapnel scar on Pavlichenko's back, a long, reddish, forked wound arcing from shoulder to spine, Eleanor embraced her and kissed her forehead. "What dreadful ordeals you've had to endure," Eleanor said softly, with genuine compassion. The ice between them melted completely. Pavlichenko came to see Eleanor as a woman of enormous charm, intelligence, and unexpected kindness, not the aristocratic snob she had assumed. They toured approximately 43 American cities together over the following months, with Eleanor personally accompanying Pavlichenko to major public events and lending her considerable prestige to the Soviet delegation. The First Lady's presence opened doors that would otherwise have remained firmly closed. When she was present, Pavlichenko later noted with appreciation, the level of meetings we secured was much higher. The tour also yielded tangible gifts: a Colt semi-automatic pistol from the U.S. government, a Winchester rifle with telescopic sight from Canada, and a raccoon fur coat from a New York workers' union. But the most remarkable and unexpected gift from the American tour was completely intangible, a genuine friendship that would somehow survive the frozen hostility of the Cold War. Eleanor Roosevelt and Lyudmila Pavlichenko maintained regular correspondence for the next 2 decades, exchanging letters about family news, interesting books they had read, and the small details of their very different daily lives. Two women from opposite sides of an ideological divide, connected by something that transcended politics and propaganda. In 1957, when Eleanor visited Moscow on an official goodwill tour, she stubbornly insisted on seeing her old friend despite Soviet minders trying desperately to restrict her itinerary. They met in Pavlichenko's modest 2-room apartment, under the watchful eye of a Soviet official monitoring the conversation. At first they spoke with careful, cool formality, both women acutely aware they were being monitored and that every word might be reported. Then Pavlichenko suddenly pulled Eleanor by the hand into the small bedroom, firmly shut the door on the startled Soviet minder, and threw her arms around her visitor in a tight embrace. Half laughing and half crying simultaneously, she told Eleanor how incredibly happy she was to see her again after so many years apart. For that brief, precious moment behind the closed bedroom door, the Cold War simply disappeared. Two old friends were reunited at last. Eleanor later wrote with evident warmth, "There is something very charming to me about the young Russian woman. She has suffered, and is suffering, something which is universal and binds all the world together, regardless of language." That friendship lasted until Eleanor's death in 1962. When Pavlichenko returned to the Soviet Union in January 1943, she was awarded the Gold Star of Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor the nation had bestowed upon any citizen. She also received the Order of Lenin, ultimately twice over her lifetime. A commemorative postage stamp featuring her portrait was issued in 1943 while she was still alive, an almost unprecedented honor for any Soviet citizen. The American folk singer Woody Guthrie wrote a song about her that helped cement her legend. Miss Pavlichenko's well known to fame, "Russia's your country, fighting is your game, the whole world will always love you for all time to come, 300 Nazis fell by your gun." She completed her interrupted university education after the war ended and built a career as a professional historian, working as a research assistant at Soviet Navy headquarters from 1945 until 1953. But multiple reliable sources indicate that her post-war years were quietly difficult, in ways that medals and honors could never address or heal. What we would today diagnose as severe post-traumatic stress disorder plagued her for the remaining decades of her life. She reportedly struggled with alcoholism, finding temporary escape from memories that refused to fade. The haunting images of Sevastopol's endless bombardment, of Kitsenko's agonizing death in that field hospital, of all those faces glimpsed briefly through her rifle scope in that final instant before she pulled the trigger, none of it ever truly left her. War takes everything from those who fight it, even from the victors. Survival itself comes at a cost that no medal or postage stamp or folk song can compensate. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died of a stroke on October 10, 1974, at the age of 58. She was buried with full military honors at the prestigious Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow, final resting place of many Soviet heroes and dignitaries. Her son Rostislav, born from that brief teenage marriage so many years before the war, outlived her by more than 3 decades, dying in 2007. Her documented service record, 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers, achieved in under 12 months of frontline combat during the most brutal fighting on the Eastern Front, remains one of the most remarkable individual military achievements of the entire Second World War. Major institutions, including the National World War II Museum, the Smithsonian, and the Library of Congress, all accept these figures as historically valued. What drove Lyudmila Pavlichenko to accomplish what she did? Was it pure patriotism and love of her homeland, burning revenge for the brutal invasion that shattered her peaceful life? That fierce, competitive streak from childhood that refused to let anyone claim she couldn't do something? The trauma of watching her husband die in her arms. The answer is probably all of these things, and more besides. Human motivation is rarely simple, especially in war. She was not merely a symbol or a propaganda icon, despite how the Soviet state used her image. She was a complete human being, complicated, permanently scarred both physically and psychologically, brave beyond any reasonable measure, yet forever haunted by what she had done and witnessed. She killed 309 human beings with her own hands. Whatever moral justification wartime provides, that weight never truly disappears. The crowd in Grand Park heard a challenge that summer day in 1942. A 25-year-old woman with visible scars and 309 confirmed kills, asking comfortable American men if they had been hiding behind her back for too long. Yes, it was calculated propaganda designed to pressure America into opening a second front in Europe, but it was also undeniable truth, spoken by someone who had earned the absolute right to speak it through blood and sacrifice and loss. And sometimes truth, delivered by the right person at the right moment, is the most powerful weapon of all. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, history student, mother, wife, sniper, decorated hero, haunted survivor. She lies now in Novodevichy Cemetery, her long wars finally over, her rifle forever silent. But her words still echo across the decades, challenging us to understand what war truly demands and what it truly costs. 309. That is the number history will never forget.